You know, I wasn't really planning on making this the first video on my channel, but the finale of Marvel's Secret Invasion recently dropped, and aside from it having been an absolute train wreck of a finale, it also left me having to confront some feelings that I've been having for a while now. Not just about the current state of the MCU, but about what its prospects are going forward, and what it feels like as a longtime fan of the franchise to watch it slowly burn out, often to the relishing of many in the online space. Now, I'm not going to be doing a deep dive review into the series because I'm sure lots of other channels are going to be tackling that right now, and I don't have 5 hours to go into all the reasons I despise this installment. But I do want to talk briefly about the state of the MCU right now, my feelings on the last few years of it overall, and what these recent failures bode for the future of the franchise. So, to get it out of the way, I don't want there to be any confusion about where I'm coming from with this video. I am a fan of the MCU. I have been since the first Iron Man came out when I was in middle school. I say this because I don't want my criticisms to be viewed as just the most recent regurgitated opinion in a cavalcade of voices on this platform that seem dedicated to tearing down literally any project that gets released under the Marvel Studios or Disney banner. We get it. Phase 4 had some pretty low moments. We get it. Every MCU title does end with a big CGI battle. And yeah, the formula has gotten a little stale and the story has gotten a little aimless since Endgame. But up until recently, I was always one of the people to defend Phase 4. I truly believe that this phase of the MCU received far more hate than it deserved. And I believe a lot of that sentiment came from people who were simply jumping on to a growing bandwagon. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people, both online and in real life, parrot, word for word, the same talking points that a lot of prominent content creators have said on their videos about how the MCU should have ended after Endgame, or how the MCU is too woke now, or reiterating the same few occasional dumb lines to showcase how all the writing in the MCU is terrible now.
Wanda, Black Bolt could destroy you with one whisper from his mouth.
What mouth? Eat my hammer!
You've got to do better, Senator. You've got to step up.
Although I will concede that some of that hate was definitely warranted, I will stand by my assessment that Phase 4 received considerably more flack than it deserved from audiences. But, you know what? Things have changed. And by changed, I mean they've gotten worse. Considerably worse. As in, potential end of the MCU worse. Now, I'm not going to pretend that things haven't been going downhill for a while. Even as a fan of the MCU, it's impossible not to have noticed the steady decline in quality that we've been seeing over the past 3 years since the end of the Infinity Saga. And while we have had a handful of good installments, and even the occasional great one, I would argue, the overall level of enthusiasm and interest for the franchise has plummeted for reasons both within Disney's control and outside of it, but let's be real, mainly for reasons within their control. I think the reason for this disengagement boils down to 3 simple problems that all connect to one another. First, it's clear that the MCU has failed to establish a cohesive overarching narrative in the aftermath of Endgame. Obviously, the multiverse saga primarily concerns the multiverse and the effects that it has on the world at large, but so far, it hasn't really affected all that much. And it isn't that much of a driving force in the broader narrative yet, the way that the Infinity Stones were for many of the movies and characters in the Infinity Saga. So far, the multiverse has only acted as a catalyst for a couple of stories within Phase 4, and there's less of a sense of it building up to something as there is of it just being something for characters to react to. It lacks the sense of mystery that the Stones had, and it lacks the same presence within the universe of the MCU, where it's constantly affecting the developments in the narrative. Not only this, but Phase 4 has also given us far too many disconnected narrative threads to keep up with, far more than the first 3 phases gave us. Just for reference, let's count how many broad multi-movie narratives there were to follow in the Infinity Saga, besides just the collecting of the Infinity Stones. You had the formation of the main Avengers team, which mainly comprised the first phase of the MCU. You had the ongoing conflict with Hydra, which spanned several films and TV shows. You had the Ultron incident, which led to the drafting of the Sokovia Accords and all the chaos and strife that resulted from that. And then you also had a little bit of intergalactic politics on the sideline in the form of the Kree-Skrull War detailed in both Guardians of the Galaxy and Captain Marvel. Other than these major threads, most of the narrative arcs were contained in standalone films and series, and even though none of these narrative arcs were that heavily linked to the collecting of the Infinity Stones, the impact that they all had on the larger story helped build toward the climax of the Infinity Saga. The formation of the Avengers gave Thanos and his army an enemy to prepare to fight against. The revelation of Hydra acting within S.H.I.E.L.D. weakened the agency's influence on the world stage, and therefore its ability to respond effectively to a large global threat. And the aftermath of the Sokovia Accords split the Avengers into factions, which made them weaker by the time Thanos arrived in Infinity War. Even the Kree-Skull conflict paved the way for Thanos to acquire a few of the Infinity Stones because of how the developments around that conflict resulted in some of them getting moved into positions that made them more vulnerable to capture. By comparison, we have yet to see any of the overarching threads in Phase 4 culminate in any big development or shakeup to alter the dynamics of the Marvel Universe. Other than Loki, very few of the post-Endgame installments have done anything to introduce something new and significant into the Marvel Universe that impacts the rest of the stories. Aside from the multiverse, it seems that every major incident that's happened in Phase 4 never gets brought up outside of the film it occurs in. Like, how many people now have made fun of the fact that Eternals literally showed a gigantic god pop out of the planet's crust, and another one just appear and vanish over a huge city, and yet not one person outside of that film has even mentioned it in passing? And I haven't seen any broader ramifications come out of the war between Wakanda and Talokan either, or the extermination of the gods in Thor: Love and Thunder, or any of the stuff that happened with the clandestines in Miss Marvel, or with the Egyptian gods in Moon Knight, or the Spirit Realm in Shang-Chi. And now Secret Invasion joins that roster of nothing burgers by introducing a planet-wide conspiracy of shape-shifting aliens that culminates in the President of the United States literally declaring war on an alien species, and I will bet my bottom dollar that not a single major development will come of this plot point in the future. Nothing has led to anything else yet, and it makes the whole franchise feel like it's throwing out a bunch of dangling plot strings that refuse to thread together. And while it's true that we're only one phase into the multiverse saga, it's been a jam-packed phase, and if we still don't have a flowing macro narrative going on even after 5 movies, 8 Disney Plus shows, and 2 special features, then I'd say it's time to phone Houston and tell them we've got a problem. The second biggest problem is the precipitous decline in quality control. I remember years ago when any new MCU release was considered an event. Sure, people may not have ended up loving every single film, but they damn well went to see it and talked about it before and afterward. And while part of that can be explained by the interest in following the growing narrative of the MCU, a bigger part of it can be explained by the care and time that was taken to craft as many of their movies as possible into being actual quality superhero films that enticed audiences while still meeting the needs of a strenuous release schedule. But ever since Disney Plus, the average quality of their projects has plummeted. I think that the preponderance of just average or mediocre shows and films has gone a long way toward coloring people's perception, even of the good projects, by association. That, plus the abuse by the studios of their VFX artists and the reliance on pre-made CGI climaxes, has led to the cinematic quality of their projects nosediving to a level that we really should not be seeing from a major entertainment studio like Marvel or Disney. And it doesn't help that the brutal release schedule of Phase 4 has left people without breathing room between the release of one title and the next. People are exhausted by it now. Franchise fatigue is a real thing. Whenever I used to hear people talk about the next MCU movie, there was usually an air of excitement or anticipation for it. Like the end of the last movie had left people thirsty to know what happens next. But now it seems that whenever the MCU gets brought up in casual conversation, the attitude is more like if someone filled up on a 5-course meal and then got offered yet another plate of food and doesn't even want to look at it. That feels like the state of things for the MCU right now. And it's pretty damning. Over the course of Phase 4, I remained hopeful, you might even say naively optimistic, that things would improve with the mounting criticism of Marvel's approach to their post-Endgame content. Phase 5 seemed like it would be the perfect opportunity to right the ship and bring the franchise back on a steady course. Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania promised to give us our first proper introduction to the next Thanos, the next major cross-movie villain of the MCU's multiverse saga. The ending of Loki even did a great job at setting up anticipation for Kang the Conqueror as the next big bad, so much so that Marvel seemed to build their entire marketing department for the film around this character. Likewise, Secret Invasion promised to be the next gritty, serious, grounded story after a phase heavily criticized, and rightly so, for its heavy reliance on humor. Ant-Man was supposed to renew excitement from audiences and restore their faith that the MCU did in fact have a direction planned, while Secret Invasion was supposed to reassure audiences that the MCU could go back to being a more serious story with stakes and a revived sense of importance. Instead, what did we get?
You're flailing. You're weak. Don't be a dick!
I'm such a dick.
Never too late to stop being a dick.
My name is Darren! I am not a dick!
Yeah, things aren't looking good, folks. I will fully admit I sat through every single movie and show in Phase 4, and even though there were some bad moments here and there, Ant-Man 3 and Secret Invasion were the first installments where, when I was finished, I actually felt dirty and used and ashamed for having ever liked and defended the MCU in the first place. And I've got to tell you, folks, when a movie or a show starts making you feel that bad, that's what you call the death rattle of a franchise. And it doesn't help when you look at the upcoming roster of what's in store for Phase 5 down the road either. Look at this slate of upcoming shows and movies. I look at this and I can pinpoint one, maybe 2 or 3 of them that seem to be encouraging any sort of enthusiasm from general audiences right now. I don't know anyone who's excited for Echo, Agatha Coven of Chaos, The Marvels, or Ironheart. Even Thunderbolts, which seems to be the big crossover climax movie of Phase 5, doesn't seem to be eliciting anywhere near the excitement or anticipation that any of the Avengers films did. The only 2 installments in this lineup that seem to be garnering any type of interest is Season 2 of Loki, which recently released their first trailer, and Deadpool 3, which is mainly relying on characters from outside of the MCU to incite interest from audiences, much like how Spider-Man No Way Home and Doctor Strange 2 did. Now, in terms of movies, I generally believe that Deadpool 3 is going to be the only title in this lineup that will see any sort of huge returns at the box office, but for all the wrong reasons. This leads into my final point. While the multiverse saga has opened up a new dimension of possibilities for the franchise and for the live-action corpus of Marvel films as a whole, I can't help but notice that the post-Endgame MCU has been relying far too much on legacy Marvel characters from outside the continuity. by far the two most financially successful films of Phase 4, No Way Home and Doctor Strange 2, both relied on the promise of reuniting audiences with nostalgic characters that the MCU had to rent out from outside its own franchise. Deadpool 3 is only following suit, and so far, the most anticipated installments to come from the MCU down the line are the ones that promised the most crossover potential. Yet in all this, any talk or hype about the actual MCU original characters is noticeably silent. Because by all appearances, the MCU has not done a satisfactory job in introducing audiences to its post-Endgame cast of heroes. When you ask someone who they're most excited to see more of in the MCU, chances are high you aren't going to see anyone excited for more She-Hulk, or more Kate Bishop, or Riri Williams, or Sam Wilson, or the Eternals. The few MCU originals that are maintaining audience engagement are the legacy characters left over from the Infinity Saga, like Doctor Strange and Spider-Man, with only a short range of newcomers like Moon Knight or Shang-Chi arousing anything more than a lukewarm reaction. Even other legacy mainline MCU titans like Thor, Hulk, and Hawkeye have fallen by the wayside and don't seem to be very central to anything going on anymore. I don't want to give the impression that many other people have, which is that there was nothing good in Phase 4, or that the MCU hasn't made installments after Endgame that are seriously worthwhile and fun. They have, and I will always defend the quality and creativity that there is to be found in Phase 4 and beyond. But the problem is, people shouldn't have to be reminded of that quality. These movies and shows should each be good enough that their quality isn't even questioned. People should be able to expect the high level of care from Marvel that we saw through the 2010s. The fact that the MCU has become a byword for mediocrity is an indictment against the way that Disney and Marvel Studios are handling this franchise. It's clear that this criticism has reached the ears of people in high positions of power, as we can see from the decision to push back the release of upcoming projects to allow for more time for quality control. But is it too late? Well, maybe. It's certainly starting to feel that way. No matter how much quality control you put in, and no matter how much Marvel and Disney course correct their operating procedures at this point, the excitement seems to be gone, and very little is being offered in the future to reignite that passion that people once had for this series. I hope I'm wrong, because I do believe that if the MCU could get back on track, that the multiverse saga does have the potential to be one of the greatest events in the history of pop culture. Maybe bigger than Endgame, I don't know. But I do know that greatness is hidden beneath the parade of CGI sludge and sloppy screenplays and designed by committee storytelling. Or perhaps it really is too late to fix things. Maybe the MCU's time really is coming to an end, in which case I think it would be a really tragic and unceremonious one, especially given everything that the MCU has given us over the last 15 years of its existence. It gets under my skin a little bit to watch so many people seeming to rejoice in the downfall of the MCU, because my emotions on it are quite the opposite, even if I agree with the basic premise. I'm heartbroken to see how bad things have gotten, and I want Marvel to find their way back to the good graces of the movie-going public again. But that needs to be their hill to climb. They need to be the ones to prove to people that they can take their stories and characters seriously, that they aren't here to just make jokes out of everything and spoon-feed us a measured dose of nostalgia with every bite of green-screened, slapdash, corporatized schlock. Stan Lee wouldn't want that. These characters and these stories have lasted as long as they have because they connected with people, and the MCU was as successful as it was because it did the same. And if Marvel or Disney or Kevin Feige or whoever is most at the helm of this franchise right now can't learn to focus on that again and put the time and care into these movies that they deserve, that they need, then I think it'll be past the point where even the most die-hard MCU fan should be willing to defend them. It's difficult to admit when something you love is turning bad, even more so when it doesn't need to be that way. And I don't think that those of us who have loved the MCU need to start hating it just to prove that we understand these problems exist. But there comes a time when defending laziness and greed becomes itself indefensible. And those of us who still want the MCU to succeed need to be willing to step back and let whatever happens happen. Either Marvel and Disney recognize their failings and correct for them before it's too late, or they persist in their current course and we watch the MCU collapse in on itself completely, because all empires have to fall someday. For better or worse, whatever happens, only time will tell.